Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Let everyone get situated. Grab your coffee, grab some treats, grab a seat. All right, we're gonna start it. So, we have coffee and treats in the back. Thank you so much for Susan Tom for bringing all the delicious snacks.
Thank you.
Yay! You got some Come on in. Come on.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you to all those who made a monetary contribution. It goes to help events like this. We spent a lot of money on trying to put together signs and awareness and all that, and so every dollar really, really helps. I truly appreciate it. A few quick announcements. We're putting up a history page on our website. So I think you posted it last night, Martin? Yep. So go in there in the About section or the History section. We're going to keep adding to it. So it's just the very beginning of it. But it's about a 3-page quick summary of what's been happening in Parker Estates since 1961. Is that crazy? And thank you to Martin, who's doing about 98% of the work on the website. So it's very expensive. If you notice, we're also filming this. So we've started a YouTube page. And so the meetings we have, we're going to look to film. So you can always go back and look at them. Especially when it comes to like emergency preparedness, we forget some of these things. And so you can always go back and look at them. You get to see Mitchell again. And so let's get to the good stuff. I'm not going to give you a bio on Mitchell. He can get his own bio. But I'll tell you how I came across his book. So I was listening to NPR this about 3 years ago or so. And it was just so fascinating. And for me, this is personal. I grew up in this neighborhood, lived here 45 years now, and I just want to know everything about Oakland. And so we started talking about Oakland. I'm like, this is so interesting. And as PEIA, we started to do more events, and it just made me think, what if Mitchell came out and gave a talk? And he could just nerd out. We all can nerd out on what we love about Oakland and our neighborhood. And so here he is. It's been about a year in the making. We've been working on this for about a year. So you get to see the culmination of all this today. So thank you so much for coming. Mitchell.
Do I need this?
You don't have
Can you all hear me without this?
Yeah.
It makes it a little easier. So I'm going to talk, roughly, we talked about half hour, 40 minutes, and then we have another half, whatever, for questions.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So I'm gonna talk about what I consider to be 4 of the key factors in shaping Oakland's urban geography. Why certain things are where they are, why people live where they are, why people move, why new people come in, and when they come in, where they go, and all that, right? So and what I'm going to do for each of them, and I'm saying this in light of the fact that I want this to be cheery, but in reality, I think, and I read the website, you've had issues in this neighborhood. Oakland is having rough times. There's no question, right? Certainly public safety is I think the major issue. Our city council person is now the Alameda supervisor, and we were working for John Bowders, hoping that Nikki would not get it, because she was actually for defunding police and all that. So we're having tough times, both in terms of public safety, and the budget is in a serious problem, and we're having a mayoral race in April and our city council race in April. So a lot of stuff going on. So in a way, what I'd like to do is explain through history, through why we've got to where we are, in part. Not 100%, no one can completely understand why we're exactly where we are, but in large part, why are we where we are now in 2025? The 4 areas I'm going to talk about, the first 3 I think are you find in most American cities, but they're a very different inflection in Oakland. the influence of transportation and transportation innovations. And secondly, the influence of what I would call systemic racism. Thirdly, the influence of, starting in the 1930s, really large government intervention in shaping urban development, which lasts to the 1970s at least. Certainly gone now. And fourthly, the most, I think, unique, and I'll probably spend the most time on this, is what does it mean to be a second city? You know, a city that's in the shadow of another city, and we all know what that other city is. And you know,
Hayward.
Right. You know, now, and then you even have San Jose now in a lot of ways, you know, although San Jose is not glamorous and all that, but it's certainly really large, you know, third largest city in California now. So those are the 4 parts I'm going to talk about. And for each of them, what I'd like to do is talk about how it influenced and then what happened, you know, the ups and downs of each of them. So the first one, transportation. I think Oakland, famously, is a transportation city. Has considered itself a transportation city. You know, during the gold rush, Oakland wasn't much. It wasn't a gold rush town. I was just in Stockton and Sacramento. Those were gold rush towns. San Francisco is a gold rush town. These are places that grew from nothing to 100,000, 50,000 people in a couple years. Oakland did not. In 1860, Oakland only had about 1,500 people. It was rather small. So it wasn't influenced as much by the gold rush as by the Transcontinental Railroad, which was planned by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War as a way of unifying the country. And from the Transcontinental Railroad all the way, I would say, till the last big transportation innovation or change was probably a couple of things. The 980, that freeway that runs on the edge of downtown. The runway, you know, the new South Airport. They called it Southfield when it was built. That was in the early 1960s. Those are the more, and I'll get to those. So those are the more recent. So we have this really incredible period of a city that is, you know, really focused on new transportation technologies. We had at one point 3 automotive assembly plants in Oakland. You know, two of them were, you know, one was Chevrolet, and then the other became GM Truck, and then we had also Fagil Motors. This was an automotive city. We thought about cars. You know, there was really high car ownership really early. The assembly of cars, and then of course the whole, you know, development of the road system, Skyline Boulevard being one of them, started in the 1920s. You know, this idea of having a road up in the hills was going to be very different in the early plans. There was actually going to be a lot of parkland along Skyline Boulevard, right off it. Little pullouts that, kind of like a rest stop when you're or a Vista point when you're driving on the highway. There were going to be 5 Vista points, so people would drive and then come, and imagine what those would be like. You know, they would probably, you know, but so transportation really shapes the city. And specifically, so you've got both, you know, and I'll just mention also the airport. The airport starts in the 1920s. The airport was larger than San Francisco Airport until the mid-1930s. There was a real chance that this could be the major airport of Oakland, of the entire Bay Area. Why? They had the land, better weather, less wind, but for a variety of reasons, because of political power and the like, the airport actually was shut down during the Second World War. It was completely devoted to military traffic. SFO was not, or what had been Mills Field. So San Francisco Airport got a tremendous boost during the Second World War and never looked back. And I think today they have about 50 to 55 million passengers a year, and Oakland has about 11 to 12.
Wow.
And about the same as San Jose. Oakland and San Jose are relatively small, and San Francisco is about almost 5 times each of them. So that's what happened. But in terms of actual urban form in the city, what you really see is a series of developments. I think they started in the 1860s, which are called horse cars, horse railways. Why do they call them railways? Because quickly they found, the entrepreneurs figured out that instead of running it on wheels, it would be more sense to run it on an iron track, like a railroad. But they were horses pulling it, not a steam engine. But they were called horse railways. And they were the first real, I would say, that's how Oakland starts to expand beyond what you call a walking city, where you can walk everywhere. The horse railways did not go fast. They went about 3.5 miles an hour. But they went, it was, I guess, it was easier to take them than to take other, than to walk. The first ones were from Oakland Point, which is now buried. It's where the BART goes under. I don't know, no one's probably old enough to remember. Do anyone remember the Oakland Mole, the great transit station where people would go out on the trestle, and then you would switch to ferry to go to San Francisco? There were 4 moles. There were one in Alameda, there were 2 in Oakland, and one on the border of Emeryville. There was a key system mole. That's how people would go from my neighborhood. I live in Lakeshore. They would take the B on the key, and they would go out onto the mole and then shift to a ferry. Those are all gone, right? That's really, in a way, sad. Maybe I should just mention at this point, tomorrow I'm not giving a talk like this one. It's only going to be about 5 minutes, but it's part of a celebration. I don't know if any of you heard of the 16th Street Station is now on the National Register, and we're trying to get something happening there. So there's going to be this whole big celebration tomorrow afternoon. It's at 2 o'clock. If you go online and look at it, you can. It's free. I think it's already got 400 people have signed up. I don't know how many will come, but anyway. So going back to urban form in terms of the city. So the first horse cars went from that Oakland Point to downtown, and then they went to what is called San Antonio, the San Antonio neighborhood, where there was a wharf that connected to the Peraltas, the Peralta Hacienda, the Spanish-Mexican who actually inherited, they were given Oakland by the Spanish crown. The Spanish crown could do things like that. We give you all of Oakland, all of Berkeley, all of San Leandro, this whole huge area. So with horse cars, the city expands out a little bit. Not that far, maybe about 1.5 miles toward West Oakland, and about similarly toward East Oakland. It's really the 1890s when horse cars are transformed into electric traction streetcars. So instead of horses pulling the horse cars, it's electricity on wires above. And the electric traction streetcars run now about 10 miles an hour. Fast. For that, this was a big advance, right? About 2.5 times as fast. And they go further, they extend much further out, but they're good at climbing hills. Not hills like to get up here. They couldn't make it up here. And so if you want to understand why all of the neighborhoods like Park Ridge up in the hills are not developed till after the Second World War, you got to wait for the automobile. The electric traction streetcar couldn't go up steep areas like 35th and Redwood Road. It's just too much. But they could go up areas and descend hills much better than horses could. And so they extend the city dramatically. I live in a streetcar neighborhood, the low foothill. I like to call Oakland has the flatlands, the lower hills, which are undulating, and then the upper hills, where we are right now. So three zones. And so really from the 1890s and through the 1920s, through the Great Depression, streetcars are really developing. These electric traction streetcars are really the engines for real estate development. In fact, the companies, they were privately run, and they were vehicles of profit. They would, the entrepreneurs would buy up land up in the all across the lower foothills, and then they would extend the streetcar line, and then they would put up signs, real estate line, and they would sell it to builders, And that's how the city, Borax Smith was the, he was the head of the key system, which was he was the major, I would say the most important, Frank Havens and Borax Smith. They ran the Realty Syndicate, that was what it was called, where the building is still downtown Oakland. So all the way up through the 20s, that's how the city starts developing, right? And when you have stairwalks, you've probably seen the stairwalks in parts where, in streetcar neighborhoods, they're there to get people quicker to the streetcar. Because it's all about money, and it's about an assessment of how far will people walk. And the assessment, it's rather not that long. And so if they could build a stairwalk and get people to the street quicker, they could sell the lots for more money. Simple as that. So you have stairwalks all through those areas. Not long after the invention of streetcars, it's really kind of fascinating. Streetcars debut in the early 1890s. Automobiles start becoming commonplace 20 years later. It's not that long. And by the 1920s, the two are both working and streetcars are already starting to decline. And for a variety of reasons, some people think of it as a huge conspiracy. Around the entire country, in the years after the Second World War, streetcar companies were bought up, often by tire companies and gasoline companies and car manufacturers, and turned into buses with less frequent service. And so the streetcar era in Oakland really lasts from the 1890s to 1948. The last streetcars ran. And then the interurbans, which are really a version of streetcars, they're attached streetcars, like 4 of them. And those were the ones that went to the Key Pier or the Southern Pacific Mole. They lasted till 1958. And they ran actually from 1936. They ran on the lower deck of the Bay Bridge. Does anyone remember that, when streetcars were on the Bay Bridge? Up to 58, So Oakland, that automobiles appear, and automobiles change everything, right? Because they offer tremendous flexibility for individuals. They can go anywhere you have a paved road or even an unpaved road. And the streetcar system was kind of hobbled by its whole, the system was unfair. The city, the public works maintained the roads, paid by the gas tax. The streetcar companies had to maintain the rails and wires. So it was really hard on them. They couldn't compete. And so they go out of business. And the automobile now does 2 things. It extends Oakland all the way up here. So all the foothills now, all the high hills start getting developed after the Second World War, already by the late 1940s and pretty much into the 1970s. That's pretty much the 25-year of building all the way from, the fire zone out there and all the way up to golf links and out in that direction. This became the kind of focus, but it wasn't the only focus. It was also Southern Alameda County, San Leandro, Hayward. It was Walnut Creek. It was Concord. It was Lafayette. It became a suburban movement all over the East Bay. So Oakland itself starts to become much less important, right? The city of Oakland, because the city of Oakland doesn't expand after 1909. Their last expansion. They don't, even Piedmont, right, preempted, Oakland's annexation in 1907. Emeryville stayed separate as well. Berkeley was separate really early, but then San Leandro and other places. So Oakland's kind of hemmed in. It's limited. It's got about 60 square miles. And there's vast development now. I think Alameda and Contra Costa County alone have over 3 million people. Oakland has about a little over 400,000. So Oakland is, maybe an eighth as large as the 2 counties of the East Bay. So the whole political power situation starts to change, right? And because industry, which had been Oakland's forte, right? Automotive assembly, shipbuilding, canneries, electronics, all sorts of things. The proclivity of industry really leads suburbanization before residences. We think of people moving out first It's really industry starts to move out first. Why? Industry wants to modernize. They have to continually redo their plants, and they want much larger surface area. They want parking. They want loading docks. They have forklifts that move. They want one-story buildings and not four-story buildings. So, and for that reason, in part, because of the automobile and automotive, let's say an automotive world, industry starts, to move out of Oakland. The federal government gives really great loans after the Second World War for veterans and others who are white to move to the suburbs, and I'll get into that in a minute. So industry's leaving, residences are moving out, and commerce. You get the first shopping centers. The Bayfair is the first major mall by Victor Gruen. Victor Gruen is the preeminent American shopping mall designer. He starts in Detroit and Minneapolis, and then he designs two in the Bay Area. One of them is Bayfair, which is kind of on its last legs now. Kind of sad, but they don't maintain the sad. Shopping centers are the last type of building complex that keeps its original appearance. So for a historian, it's always like, there's not much left. But you see all the kind of elements, right, of a city. Industry, shopping, residents are moving out further. In a way, this parallels the earlier movement that the streetcars inaugurated, because everything was downtown then, before the streetcars. And after the streetcars, most people start moving away from downtown, residents. Industry moves out of downtown. So the streetcars inaugurated the same kind of movement, only it was more limited. The automobile, it goes all the way out now to Brentwood. Now it's out in Tracy and Lathrop. People are commuting. I was out in Turlock, and I was driving toward the Bay Area at the end of the day, and there was a line of cars heading toward Turlock and Modesto. So people are going from all the way out there and working in, along the 580, 680 corridors, or even further in. So, the automotive world is, just vast, and the word sprawl really starts to describe it. And BART was built as an alternative to building a second bridge over another Bay Bridge. The Bay Bridge opened in 36, Golden Gate Bridge a few months later in 37. And the Bay Bridge was immediately an incredible success, but a success that was troublesome. It was really packed. And so already, as soon as the war ended, there's discussions about building another Bay Bridge. Some of them right next to the existing one. There would have been right one. And then other ideas were to go from Bay Farm Island, by where the airport is now, to like around where Candlestick Park was. It was called the Second Crossing. And there were debates all through the 40s and into the 50s, and a decision was made by the late 50s, no, we're not going to build a second Bay Bridge because we can relieve the bridge by creating the BART network and creating a tube across the bay. And so really BART's function from its inception, it was going to be 9 county, then it went to 7, then it went to 5, then to 3. Right? It ended up being just San Francisco, Alameda, and Contra Costa. Then lately it's expanded. But the idea of BART right away was get people into San Francisco downtown and Oakland, supposedly. Build up the downtowns, right? Focus, relieve the Bay Bridge. And it did its purpose. San Francisco's downtown grew dramatically to the point when I worked for the Department of City Planning in the 1980s in San Francisco. People were just agog against Manhattanization and new tall buildings. They were all upset, we have to limit growth, etc. It worked really well. The problem is, when it became a 3-county system, it was really like centered on Oakland, the whole BART network. If you look at the map, that sounds great, right, for Oakland. Just like the highway network, the freeways, which were built at the same time. The first was the 880, then the 580, then the Warren, and then the Grove Shafter, the 24. All 4 freeways, if you look at the Bay Area, the maze is really kind of the center of the Bay Area freeway network. Downtown Oakland is the center of the BART network. You'd think that those would have a lot of positives. They do in some ways, but really they created a lot of disruption, a lot of construction, and people learned very quickly, we can Union Square is only three BART stops further than downtown Oakland, so we might as well go there. There's more it's San Francisco. So Oakland didn't benefit as much. And the office explosion that was supposed to happen in downtown Oakland didn't happen. It never became, I think it's about on the order of 100 million square feet versus like about 18 million, San Francisco to Oakland. Big difference. So the city, you can see how everything changes, right? And if I'll end with the transportation part. Basically, I'm probably talking too long, so I'm gonna have to. You look at streets in Oakland, right? Like San Pablo Avenue, or East 14th, which is now called International Boulevard. They really suffered. All those streets suffered dramatically. Lost businesses, became a lot of abandonment. Why? Because the freeways basically took all the traffic off of them. The shopping malls are now and shopping centers are where people want to go to shop. They don't shop a lot because it's harder to park, and the stores are old and they're smaller. A Safeway goes from, early Safeways were about 2,500 square feet. Now they're about 55,000 square feet, right? It's a gradual growth in size, right? A Costco's can be 70 to 100,000 square feet, right? And that's where people are shopping. Walmart, Costco, So the old shopping, districts, they didn't, and it was an automotive influence, right? It's all about the car. If you're gonna go shopping at a Costco, you're not gonna walk, right? Who's gonna carry anything home from Costco, right? Right? So, big change. And this disadvantages a city like Oakland, an old city. I mean, all old cities around the country were disadvantaged. I'm sure some of you are from other cities. San Francisco is a unique city. San Francisco did not lose a lot of neighborhood commercial districts. Very few. It maintained more than any city in the entire country, percentage-wise. It really, only a few really deteriorated. Divisadero, you might remember when that was kind of very sketchy, kind of abandoned. 3rd Street in the Bayview has had a lot of rough times. Ocean Avenue a little bit. But by and large, the San Francisco small commercial districts stayed strong. Oakland only maintained a few. Even Lakeshore, where I live, was considered having really rough times in the 70s and 80s. Piedmont Avenue had, those are the stronger ones. Rockridge, College and Rockridge, Piedmont, Lakeshore, Grand. And now we've had a few revivals, which is good in more recent times. But it's automotives, right? It's the automotive culture. I mentioned the move to the suburbs, and that in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, it was virtually impossible for black people to move to the suburbs. It was very hard for Asian people to move to the suburbs. If you were not of the so-called Caucasian race, it was really hard because there were things called restrictive covenants. And I'm sure Park Ridge probably had which it shouldn't have had one because they were illegal they were illegal in 1948. Did it have one?
Yes.
Which tells you something. And the Supreme Court declared them legal in 26 and illegal in 48. But they were still operative into the 50s and into the 60s, really till the 70s. People were using them. The area I live was restricted. All these areas were restricted. And it's really not until, in my neighborhood, it was really until the mid-1950s into 1960 that a person of color, so an Asian family, a Latino family, or a black family could move in. How did they do it? They usually had a white person buy the house and then sell it to them because the owners wouldn't sell. I think it's hard for us to remember, but I think that a lot of probably you do remember how racist things were. Just incredible, the things that were said and the things that were done. So blacks and other people of color could not move to the suburbs. They could not move to the high hills, and that tells you a lot about Oakland geography. That tells you about neighborhood succession. Up until I would say the Second World War. West Oakland was a mixed neighborhood. Was whites, blacks, it was a lot of Mexicans, all lived in West Oakland. Asians. West Oakland became largely black after the Second World War. Why? Because there was a huge migration of blacks from the South to Oakland. Why was there a huge migration of blacks to the South? Because the 1924 Immigration Act basically cut off immigration from most of the places that people had been coming from, Southern and Eastern Europe. They were basically eliminated. You couldn't move. And so the only place, if industries wanted workers, they had to get them from within the United States, the American South, and Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is a territory. So Puerto Ricans and blacks were the two groups that could move in. They didn't move out to California from Puerto Rico. It would go to Chicago or New York. But blacks, there was a big black migration to the Bay Area and to Los Angeles during the war to work in war industries. And it continued after the war. Oakland's black population goes from about 2.5%, that's it, in 1940, to 48% in 1980. And now it's down to about 20. And probably will go down to 15 by the next census. It's shrinking. Things go up and down. This is what I try to explain to people all the time, especially if that nothing stays the same in cities. And migration patterns are completely part of that. They're influenced by national and global events. And so the black migration, why let's say has the black migration population in Oakland changed? Largely because there's not an influx anymore. That stopped. And really, the immigration system changed in 1965. There was a new Immigration Act, which now permitted much larger immigration from other countries. From 24 to 65, it was basically like you had to be coming from a country that already had a huge population in the United States. England, Germany, France. It was like, so countries where there weren't a lot of immigrants coming from. Now it opened up. And so if you look at the Oakland demographics after 65, really starting, I remember I moved to Oakland in 81, and there were like maybe 5 Mexican restaurants in all of Oakland, 4, There were a couple downtown, and there were a couple right east of the lake, and 1 in Fruitvale. That was it. And then I was gone for 9 years, and I came back, and I was like, oh my God. It exploded, right? There's probably hundreds now, and Asian. So the Asian population, basically East Asian and Latino populations, tremendous dramatic rise after the mid-70s to now. Where now the 2 largest groups in Oakland are white and Latino. And the next 2 are black and Asian, and they're almost similar. So it's really all 4 groups have large populations. And it's because of these changes in immigration acts, and it has and immigration patterns and movement and the like. Very hard. Cities can't control these things. It's just this is what's happening. Restrictive covenants were declared illegal. Eventually, the Federal Housing Act may start to enforce that. We wonder what's going to happen now. Redlining is another. I just want to quickly distinguish. Restrictive covenants are when a homeowners association or an individual house puts on its deed or CC&R. It says, and this would be the language, no people of the African, Mexican, or Oriental race may live here. And they would use the word Negro usually in those days. Or they would say Caucasian only. They would put it, this was actually in the deed. This is for selling and buying houses. Redlining is different. Redlining is actually maintained by the federal government. It was a system that was put in during the Second World War by the Roosevelt administration to jumpstart housing. And basically what the federal government says, we will guarantee loans for banks if certain criteria of security are met. And so the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, was established to rate neighborhoods for the likelihood of paying back a loan. That was what it's all about, right? And so they rated them in 4 different categories: red, yellow, blue, and green. And the green were the most favorable. They all got, blue and green were like super duper amazing. Banks love them. Red, no good. Yellow, So what makes a neighborhood red versus green or blue? 3 criteria. Homogeneity of building age. That was the first. So buildings all had to be built of the same period. They like that. So this neighborhood qualified perfectly. Although this wasn't around in 38, so they wouldn't have put it in there. But neighborhoods that were all homogeneous and had all buildings from the same era were really considered favorable. Second was buildings that had, again, homogeneous uses. And in this case, single-family houses only. If you had apartments, that was not so good. That put you in a yellow zone. You know, if you had stores, not so good. Industry, very bad. So residential only and single family was the most preferred. And lastly, races. They judged by people. So if you had an all-white neighborhood, that was fantastic. You were green or blue. If you had an all-black neighborhood, that would presumably be similarly fantastic, but no one was building new housing that allowed blacks because of all the covenants. So you couldn't have that. You couldn't have those kind of neighborhoods. And and they weren't wealthy enough to afford these kind of neighborhoods. So it effectively, the racial requirement was mixed. It was about mixed races. It didn't say blacks are, automatically a red line neighborhood if it has a lot of black people. It was if it has black people and Asian people and white people. Oh, that's bad. Because that's seemingly predicted that it would be a lot of racial transition and it would be unstable. These were so that's redlining. So now you have a sense of the difference between the covenants. But basically all of those, all these practices were stopped by the late 60s, early 70s. But things have changed dramatically in terms of where people can live. But they're not, nothing gets perfect right away. The next thing I want to mention, government. Until the 30s, the Roosevelt administration, okay? The federal government and the state government were really, and even municipal government, were not involved in most aspects of urban development. They were not involved in transportation. The companies were owned privately, the mass transit companies. They were not involved in road building that was contracted out to private companies. They were not involved in building housing. None of it. What did government do? The first thing they started to do around the turn of the century is they would build city halls and civic centers and parks. So that was really the realm of government in the early 20th century. The Roosevelt administration really gets government involved in housing. They start building public housing, which was originally called low-rent housing for people. That was, during the Depression, you have more than a quarter of the workforce is unemployed. So we need to build housing for those, have housing for those people. They'll get on their feet soon and then they'll move into privately built housing. So that was the idea of public housing, was a temporary measure called low-rent housing to deal with a really rough period. They also start building roads and bridges, assisting with all of this. The freeway systems was a government plan, the interstate highway system done during the Eisenhower administration. The BART system, huge funding from the state and the federal government. So the government is doing all sorts of things from the 30s to the 70s. It's extremely activist, right? And this is really what results in all these amazing changes that happen in Oakland, right? The freeway system, the 4 freeways, the BART system, public housing, urban renewal, which was another government-inspired idea. It was to take neighborhoods and change them and revitalize them, either by really looking at, doing visits to every single house and checking whether everything is up to code, and if not up to code, giving it a demolition order. Or, and that was done in Clinton. That was the first urban renewal district in the entire west of the United States, Clinton Park, so right east of the lake. They used extensive code compliance. And then slum clearance, that was the more extreme, that was done in West Oakland. That was done, the Acorn was the most notorious example of that, where they just took out 6,000 homes and industry. Just everything was demolished and then put in new, privately built. This was not public housing, this was privately built. But over time, the government actually had to take it over because became a mess. The idea of Acorn, by the way, was that it would be a cordon sanitaire, a kind of barrier between a hope for wealthy, high-rise downtown residences, which Oakland was thinking of in the 60s, never happened. Only started happening under Jerry Brown, right? It took a long time. And the Acorn would be half white, half black. It would be moderate income. And that lasted for 3 years. And the whites were like, wait, they kind of realized right away, well, we get a big house in Hayward, or we can go anywhere. Blacks couldn't. So basically the whites left and it became all black, and then eventually became all low income, not moderate income. So a lot of those things didn't work out. Those are all, that's that era of government involvement. Today though, after the Grove Shafter Freeway was finished in the mid 70s, there has been almost no major, we have not built public housing in Oakland. We have not, and that's the case across the country. We have not built any new freeways. We have not added a light rail system. We have not added any BART stations. I'm talking about in the city of Oakland. I'm working on a plan now to build a BART station in San Antonio with a group that wants to have called an infill BART station between Lake Merritt and Fruitvale, because it's a 3-mile distance. But it's basically, we went from incredible tumult and action and dislocation and development, right? From the late 30s to the 70s, to the last 50 years, almost nothing. Just kind of static. And that's been good in one sense, less disruption, and bad in another sense, we're not doing anything. There's not much happening. San Francisco added that, a light rail system on 3rd Street. They added that central subway, questionable, but it was done. San Jose built a whole light rail system. Sacramento built a light rail system. Long Beach built one. LA has built a huge heavy rail and light rail. San Diego has done it, but the East Bay hasn't. Oakland, Berkeley, we haven't done much in terms of transportation. Clearly, and then the whole Jerry Brown into Libby Shaft, the whole housing you see, especially downtown with Jack London Square, a little bit uptown Valdez, Broadway Valdez, that's all private. It's not government. It's a different. In fact, redevelopment agencies were abolished in 2012 by Governor Brown. He was using them earlier and then he abolished them. So that whole mechanism of doing large-scale transformations through a redevelopment agency is not possible anymore. So that's the third. There's not a lot of government involved, not a lot of government action anymore. There's not a lot of government, there's no government money, especially now. Like, they're taking away what government money there is. So we're in a kind of tight vice in terms of the government helping, both the federal, the state, and even the local. And fourth, let me see what time. I should have had a watch. I'm doing it.
Got a clock up there too. So.
Yeah. Oh, great. Fourth, I think the fourth part is I think most specific to the Bay Area and Oakland is this being a second city, right? We are a classic example of that, right? Although second cities vary dramatically. I'll give you an example. Dallas-Fort Worth is an idea of two cities that are, Fort Worth is the second city, Dallas is the largest city. But they're not that different in population. It's not that huge. San Francisco is about twice as big as Oakland, population-wise. Dallas is not twice as big as Fort Worth. Minneapolis is not twice as big as St. Paul. The gap is smaller. St. Paul is also the capital. Dallas and Fort Worth are also about 40 miles apart. They're much further. So in terms of those examples, the closer you are to the bigger city in size, the better, right? On the other end of the spectrum, if you look at Chicago, my first academic job was in Chicago, University of Illinois. Chicago, you got Chicago, which is this huge city, and what's the second city? they're tiny. There's Gary, Indiana, which is a mess now. There's Joliet, there's Aurora, there's Elgin, there's Waukegan. There's a row of, and there, whereas Chicago used to be well over 2 million people, none of those other cities had more than 100,000. So it's a big difference. And those cities have fared very badly, largely. So when the gaps are big, it's worse. We're kind of in between the example of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Chicago example, being half the size, right? And I think Oakland thought for a long time, I would say well over 100 years, that we could overtake San Francisco. There was really a belief that it was possible. Why? Well, we've got more flat land. It's important, especially for industry. Better weather. It's sunnier, we don't have the fog. The airport, why would you have that airport when you could have, but sometimes weather, it doesn't work that way. We're on the continental side. The railroad ends here, right? Didn't people used to have to take the ferry to get to San Francisco from Oakland? You know, Oakland, you know, it's logical that this should be the huge city and San Francisco should be the, you know, the Venice, you know, the boutique city. But it ends up being San Jose becomes the huge city, Silicon Valley. No one saw that coming, right? That was really a post-war phenomenon. No one saw that happening. But because we were the second city, I think it was good and bad. Oakland was constantly trying to figure out ways to best San Francisco, or to be equal, or, you know, and bigger, and, you know, and some of them worked. You know, does anyone have an idea what a thought of what were the things that Oakland did that were better than San Francisco? Like
Sports teams.
the sports teams. I'm working on a film now with about it's called The Rise and Fall of Major League Sports in Oakland. Rise and fall. It's a remarkable rise. Building the county, Oakland Alameda County Coliseum and Arena was amazing. You know, to actually do that. It was based only on the Raiders, by the way. We didn't know the A's were going to come. When the deal was struck in '62, the A's were still, you know, in Kansas City, and Charlie Finley hadn't figured out a way to get them out of Kansas City and bring them over. That hadn't happened. But there was a will, and there was a philanthropic elite. And this is a big explanation for why things are different now. Oakland from the 20s to the 70s was a Republican town. Remember? Yes, Republican mayors every single election. More Republican voters than Democratic voters. It's hard to even imagine it now, right? And, you know, white Republicans, right? The Nolan family, who owned the Oakland Tribune and ran it, and they were the makers and shapers of Oakland. You know, that newspaper and that family. The Kaiser family. It wasn't just Kaiser Permanente, it was Kaiser Steel, Kaiser Cement, Kaiser Aluminum. It was an enormous corporation based in Oakland, and Henry J. Kaiser was a major philanthropist. Bechtel family, the engineering construction family, was based in, the office was in San Francisco, but they lived here. They lived right by, Stephen Bechtel lived in the same building as Nolan, right by the lake. We call it the Bechtel building to this day, right next to Snow Park. So there was a large philanthropic elite. That philanthropic elite did lots of stuff. And they were behind the Alameda County Arena and Coliseum. Which was a huge victory for Oakland. We got 4 professional sports teams. 4. And one lasted only 8 years, the hockey team. But the other 3 lasted over 50 years if you discount those years that the Raiders were in Los Angeles. The strange move to LA and coming back. The whole thing was like 12 years. We had 3 professional teams for a relatively small city, and then we lost all 3. One to San Francisco, but the other 2, and you start. Why were we not able to keep those teams here? I think the major reason is we don't have that kind of philanthropic elite, that private-public partnerships that work to keep things. That's what got the teams here. I was interviewed for an article about this in the Chronicle. That's why they left. The mayors were not that interested, to be honest, especially the last mayor, when the A's left. But I don't think Libby Sheff was I don't think he could have done anything to keep the Warriors. I think that was, and they only moved across the bay. They didn't leave the area. But there was, probably a possibility of keeping both the Raiders and the Athletics. And I don't think there was the will on the part of the city because the population had changed, but I don't think there was that kind of public-private workings that made the Arena Coliseum possible in the first place, that made the Oakland Museum possible. These are the people who basically backed and built the Oakland Museum, which was 3 little museums, kind of little nothing museum. They're really, the Snow Museum. Does anyone remember the Snow Museum? Natural History Museum in Snow Park. The mansion's gone now. The building's gone. Very sweet, amateurish museum. The History Museum was right by Lake Merritt in the Stanford, the Carson Stanford House. And the Art Museum was tucked into the Memorial Auditorium in a little corner. That was it. It was called the Art Gallery. And then we create, the Oakland Museum, which opened in '69, is a major, it's a significant museum. I consider that a big victory also. Anyone have any other thoughts of another victory? The sports teams and the museum.
The park system.
Which is mostly not the city, though.
Right, it's true.
It's the East Bay Regional Park System.
But I think also there were philanthropists and
Definitely.
families that supported that.
The East Bay Regional Park System, it's in my will. They're in my will. I consider them to be amazing. It's the largest regional park system in the United States, and it's only part of the Bay Area. So it's larger than the Chicago park system, which is all of Chicago, or the Boston park system, which is all of Boston. Just Alameda Country Costa County has a larger park system than all American cities. It's a jewel, and but it's sort of Oakland, but it's Berkeley.
By the port.
The port, I would say the port is definitely, that was the one I would say the port and in terms of besting San Francisco, it's the sports teams and the port, the container port. And it was forthright, it was forward thinking. It was also, San Francisco couldn't compete because they don't have the land and they don't have the highway connections. It was just, and so Oakland realized that and said, okay, we can make this happen. And basically San Francisco port fell apart after that. And we were at one point the second largest container port in the world for a short period of time after Rotterdam in 1968. And now we're not. Now we're kind of with Seattle, second in the Pacific coast of the U.S. But I think Savannah is much larger. L.A. Long Beach is huge. We're not as large because we don't have the land. And we're also not as large a metro area. You ask about why Savannah, but it somehow works that way. So the port, so these are victories. And there were other victories, right? Children's Fairyland was a public-private, there's the Parks Department of Oakland working with private, individuals. That it was called the Lake Merritt Breakfast Club, which was an association of business leaders. They were behind Children's Fairyland. And so there were lots of things that happened in that era but there were a lot of things that didn't happen. I think one of the big failures, can anyone think of any big failures? Oakland competing with San Francisco where we just couldn't, and I mentioned downtown. We didn't match their downtown. Jack London Square, definitely. I wrote a whole article on that. It's in California History Journal, Jack London Square. Jack London Village was part of Jack London Square. It rose up for a time and then was demolished.
There was a rise up?
Yes.
No, okay.
It had a period of about 20 years, 15, 20 years when it was something. It was much more than what came after. The whole thing started in '51, and it was really organic and it was piecemeal. But then it got bigger and bigger, and the Port of Oakland started getting involved, and they had two big plans basically. This is what one was in the late '80s, where they really wanted to create a regional shopping center with stores like the Gap and Sharper Image and these kind of mid-size, not huge, not Macy's, but smaller, kind of like Powell Street Plaza in Emeryville. They wanted to create something like that, but they didn't have free parking. and they didn't have a good freeway access. And downtown Oakland was considered really unsafe. This is in the 80s. So it didn't work. None of the stores didn't come. Same reason why when Oakland demolished most of its land for downtown, a lot of land for city center, you know, where what's called Oakland City Center, there's 18 blocks were demolished completely. That was an article I wrote too that preceded the book. They wanted to have the plan was to have five major department stores. Bullock's, Macy's, Emporium Capwell, they were all gonna, and they didn't come. So, you know, those things. So Jack London Square, yeah, that 80s plan never worked. And then they created another plan in 2009. They built that big building that was gonna be like, supposed to be the ferry building, right? Because remember, the 89 was competing against Pier 39. San Francisco did Pier 39, so we gotta do something like it. Didn't happen. Then the ferry building, that's amazing. San Francisco has the ferry building. We're gonna have a marketplace bigger than the ferry building. I remember reading articles about that, and then nothing happened. There's no market. A few restaurants. Huh?
Didn't it happen?
Why did none of this happen?
Yeah.
There are no tourists coming to Oakland.
No parking.
Parking is an issue, safety is an issue, but I think the bigger issue is they never got a big anchor, a magnet. Like if you look at Baltimore, which is a city kind of like has a lot of Oakland qualities, you know, if you look at Baltimore, right? I don't know if any of you been to the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. You know, they got Rouse to build the Harbor Marketplace, and they got Maryland Science Center, and they got the aquarium, and then they got Camden Yards Baseball Stadium. They got 4 major magnets, and then more. We never had a single magnet. The baseball park at Howard Terminal could have been a magnet, but we've never had that. So I think that's between safety and parking and a lack of a big magnet attraction. Jack London Square never really, it didn't pan out, you know. So that is a failure. Yeah,
So
that
you
was.
know what's going into the market there now? Dave and Buster's.
You're right. It's going to be kind of like the plank. It's going to be like it's something. And it's 16 years after that building was finished. It's taken that long. So I think my sense is this competition with San Francisco, so it led to a lot of striving and a lot of, like, we could, that's good, right? On the other hand, it led to some unrealistic, because San Francisco is San Francisco, although now it's not, right? That when I used to talk about this years ago, it was like San Francisco was my college. I taught for 26 years at California College of the Arts, which is in Rockridge, right? You know where the campus is. It's shuttered now, right? And I was the president of the faculty senate when the decisions were being made, and I fought it. And I was like, this is crazy to consolidate in San Francisco, to sell close to 5 acres of East Bay land. It's stupid. Don't do this. They did it. Because they don't listen to faculty. It's basically a few board members and the president come up with these decisions. But the reason, why did they want to leave Oakland? Because San Francisco, it's a magical word. It'll attract students, will be all this. Now it's actually not a magical word because of the fentanyl crisis and the homeless crisis. And, San Francisco's ailing for the first time, really. I think it's the worst it's ever been. I can't think of it. There's never been a time. Not the neighborhoods, but the center areas. It's real. So at this moment, it's interesting. I can't say the same thing. You can't compete with San Francisco, because now you could. But Oakland's even ailing more. That's the sad. We've got the same homeless problem, and our our deficits are greater. And I go all the time to San Francisco, and their parks are so well maintained compared to ours, which are just, not the East Bay Regional, but the city. So it's a tough. So I think Jerry Brown was the first mayor who kind of said, can't compete head on with San Francisco. This is foolish. And we're not going to do mega projects like slum clearance. That's crazy. So we're going to do scattered development and bring in lots of wealthy people to downtown. And that's good. Oakland needs a balance. And I think he's accomplished much of what he wanted. I think Libby Schaaf tried to continue that. I think there's been a lot of movement in that direction. Unfortunately, the Great Recession hit, and then the pandemic hit. So each time if you remember, each time Oakland started to there was a lot of talk about in the mid-teens, right? Like 2015, 2016, 2017, a lot of talk about Oakland was the next Brooklyn. It's up and coming, it's hip, it's cool, it's great. Crime was going down. Then the pandemic hits, everything falls apart. So that was our situation. So that's a lot of information. I think it's probably best if I stop and get questions.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have a comment, not a question. Like, I work in downtown Oakland. I've worked there for decades, and watching the change in downtown Oakland after Jerry Brown, and then when the recession and COVID hit, like it's just an example of the roller coaster that you talked about. Oakland's changed so much.
I remember when I moved to Oakland in '81, you didn't walk west of Broadway in the daytime. If you wanted to be, if you were concerned about, it was rough. The others, the western side of Broadway. Chinatown was the only real area that had restaurants and activity. Right. There was no, old Oakland didn't exist. It was kind of completely alien. Uptown, there was nothing going on. Jack London, nothing. So when I came, like I said, when I came back, I was like, oh my God, there was a big change, and there is a lot of positives. On the other hand, it's not as positive as you want it to be. There's still, there's still a lot of crime. There are a lot of, there's still no retail virtually. We lost all our department stores. Sears was the last, and that's been over 10 years, I think. So it's gone. Yeah, it's like Oakland. It's like, and I can't tell you how many articles I've read going through newspaper listings of Oakland's about to turn a corner. Oakland's about to, and so it's almost like that's a lasting story.
A comment and then a question. First, I just want to say thank you. That information you've given us is very helpful, and it makes me think of the Oakland Zoo. I feel like that has exactly what you described, and I never thought about it that way, where there is this, it was kind of going down, but the private and the public came together, and I'm thinking that it's gotten better. They've got the gondola there, and so I just see it as a success story for Oakland. And the question I have is not related to that, but Piedmont. How did Piedmont how did that happen? I'm just trying to understand that.
Piedmont didn't want to sell.
Piedmont didn't want to sell. Okay, that makes sense.
I don't know.
Piedmont is like Beverly Hills, right?
Yeah.
On a smaller scale.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Beverly Hills incorporated to prevent Los Angeles from taking it, and they fought it because they were really wealthy, and Piedmont is the same. A lot of the Oakland leaders historically have lived in Piedmont. Because Piedmont is like this little oasis. I live 2 blocks from Piedmont, and a house in Piedmont versus a house where I live is going to add about $250,000 or $300,000 to the same exact house, just because it's Piedmont. Because Piedmont has the best school district in the entire East Bay. They just rated the schools. I think 99% of Piedmont high school seniors qualify for UC admission.
Yeah.
99, and it's better than any other district. So Piedmont people, but it's wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how did it, was there really a Mr. Piedmont at one time?
No, there
So
was.
they said, I'm not.
The name doesn't come from a person. It comes from Piemonte, foothills.
Okay.
It's Italian. There's, the Piedmont is foot, and
Yeah.
Monte is hill. So the term Piedmont means foothill. So they use the term. No, it was
a city or
It was not. It was no. It was unincorporated. The way like San Lorenzo is unincorporated, right? Castro Valley is unincorporated, right? Unincorporated areas are subject to annexation by the city. And Piedmont knew that Oakland was growing, and they said in 1906, 1907, they worked to declare themselves a city to prevent Oakland annexing them, and they succeeded.
Thank you.
Did Oakland's Chinatown start developing about the same time as San Francisco?
Oakland's, yeah, maybe. I'm not sure if it was as old because Oakland was 10 years later, but yeah. And it wasn't really just a Chinatown. It was really it was Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, early on. They called it Chinatown, but it moved a few times.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it moved, and it was it was right on the northern edge of downtown, and it ended up where it is now. Part of it was where the freeway is now. The freeway, if you look at the 880, it goes right through Oakland, Chinatown, what was Oakland, Chinatown, right through the Mexican area, which was where the jail is and all that stuff, and then right through the Black Oakland and West Oakland. It was one of those situations that you put freeways through
Through poor areas.
areas of least resistance, yeah.
Yeah, have you heard about Rise East in East Oakland?
What?
Rise East in East Oakland.
Yeah, is that?
It's a 4540 block, I understand. They raised already $100 million. So that's what you wonder what your take on that whole experiment.
Is that the one by the Eastmont Town
It's,
Center?
It's quite far, it's kind of deep as East Oakland, and it's got Steve Ballmer's gates, gold, a lot of the things.
Have they built anything?
They're raising funds.
They're raising
now.
money. Are
And
they
my
cons-
worry is it's gonna spend more money raising the money than doing stuff with the money.
Yeah, I know about this. There's a called Black Entrepreneur Zone
Yeah.
right across from the Eastmont Town Center that's supposedly building. They have a farmer's market, and they're supposed to build something. There's supposed to be that group that's buying the Coliseum, right?
Which is different.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with any of that. There's been so much talk over the years about things happening. I don't know whether those things will actually happen. The goal, the dreams, because like we were talking about, a lot of the dreams just haven't happened. The people talk about them, and then.
Somewhere in your book you said Oakland had about 1/10 the number of parks we should have. Is that still true?
I can't give you a firm answer because no one has done the calculation vis-a-vis the United States. But I imagine that compared to a lot of cities, we have less, if you don't count the East Bay Regional Parks, if you leave those out of the equation, and those are, other than MLK, right, which is by the airport, most of the East Bay Regional Parks are not that accessible. They're in the high hills. I think we're pretty much like Los Angeles and Berkeley. We never built a large park in an accessible area. You go to LA, that's the two things I don't like about LA. The lack of parks in the accessible areas and the traffic. But, we're like LA. We never, we built it. The Griffith Park is more like,
Golden Gate?
not Golden Gate, the one. Joaquin Miller, exactly. It's not so accessible. Joaquin Miller is a smaller version of Griffith Park, I think. And then we got the East Bay Regional Park System, which is kind of extraordinary. But yeah, it was supposed to be where I live. The big
Flatlands.
It was going to be the idea of the park, of having a great park in Oakland, was to go from, it was an idea that Olmsted thought up, Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Mountain View Cemetery and was here to work on Berkeley campus. The idea was that what we have uniquely are creeks that flow from the high hills to the bay. And if you could create a park that goes along that all the way up, that would be incredible. And this park was supposed to go from Lake Merritt up through Trestle Glen to Diamond Canyon, and up through Diamond Canyon up to where Redwood Regional Park is now. It would have been.
Well, there is a trail that goes up to Diamond Canyon.
There's little bits of it up there, right? But the lower part doesn't exist at all, right? Like if you know where, Haddon Hill by Lake Merritt, that area above Lake Merritt on the east side, that was supposed to be part of the park. All of Trestle Glen would have been in the park. All of that area, Long Ridge, that all would have been the park, and that would have been very accessible, very central, and it didn't happen. So, and it's sad to say, but that's something that's not something we can change now. It's just too late, for that.
Can you talk about sort of how this area is developed and what kind of brought in development up here, and just little nooks and crannies of what you know about it?
I think what brought development up, was the 580 and the 13. we built freeways were built on the lower hills, and then with the Warren in the higher hills, right? And roads were built, Keller and all the other connector roads like Redwood Road, and developed, it was mapped out, it was platted out, all the way from Berkeley, the Berkeley Hills, all the way through the Oakland Hills. This was the next, once you had automobiles and you had road building and freeway building, it became logical to start parceling, selling out the land. Luckily, the East Bay Regional Park land was called surplus land. It was originally owned, but one of the reasons, if you think about the whole Bay Area, right? One of the reasons we have so much parkland, Marin has an enormous amount as well, and the peninsula has a lot, is drought. Our Mediterranean climate, we needed catchment basins, right? We needed watersheds and reservoirs. And that's why we have Lafayette Reservoir and Briones Reservoir and all the reservoirs, right? But it wasn't done for parks. It was done for water, right? We needed water. Before the East Bay, before the 20s, when we built the East Bay Mud built this amazing system from the Mokelumne River. That's where our water comes from. It comes from the Sierra now. We don't rely on Lake Temescal and Lake Chabot, right, anymore. But we did, and it was a problem, right? It wasn't enough. So, but having that climate meant we had all this land. And when the East Bay Mud was formed in the 20s, the decision was made not to be part of San Francisco system. They had all this land that they didn't need for watersheds. And they sold it. They actually sold it to the East Bay Regional Park system, for admittedly less, but that's what this is. Behind you is Chabot, right? I think. Yeah, Chabot was called Grass Valley Regional Park. That was its original name. And so that's how we got that land. We got it because it had been part of the watershed for the water systems. It's also military reasons is another reason we have a lot of parkland in the Bay Area. But those are, yeah.
Two things I've been told, and I wonder if you can validate. First one was Skyline Boulevard. How it goes from a boulevard back to 2 lanes as you head towards Grass Valley.
And it just kind of ends.
And then, but
It
there's a
kinda
fire
goes
road right below it, and then the fire road
You
goes
make
around
that-
the reservoir. I was always told the plan was to have it be a boulevard all the way down to Grass Valley, but for some reason, they chose not to. And the only reason I started asking the question is that fire road actually has like drains in it and fire hydrants along it. Have you ever heard that story of?
Not about the fire
That
hydrants.
the fire road was actually supposed to be the other half, the
It makes sense, though.
southbound side of.
I think like I said earlier, I think the original early plans for Skyline was going to be this kind of like Shenandoah Parkway. You know that in Virginia, and it was going to have pullouts, and people would drive there, and you would look at the view, and then go. It was going to be this kind of. But then after the war came, residential developers started grabbing up all the land, and the city. There was a lot of money to be made in selling the land, and so they didn't do that vast boulevard, the one they wanted, and probably those areas are left over from that idea. It makes sense.
I always heard this was actually annexed into the city, this neighborhood.
Well, everything was annexed. Yeah, this is the last annexation. This was the last annexation. The same annexation that brought in a lot of East Oakland.
And then the other question I had is, before you talk about Highway 13 and 580, that before the 580 and 13s, like development stopped at the base, what you call them, the middle hills or the.
Yeah, I think I was talking about that earlier. Until the
vacation
car.
homes. There were vacation homes for San Franciscans.
Yeah, there were like a lot of the, even the early interurbans, right? They usually started at some vacation resort. Like there was Piedmont Springs in Piedmont. There was Blair Springs in East Oakland. These were the end points for the interurbans. And there was also the Claremont Hotel. That was the E line ended at the Claremont Hotel. The F line, there is another line, I think was it the F or the A, that went to Idora Park on its way to Berkeley. So before the development.
Where they took the boat across
This
the
was
bay
right.
and
This
they
was a
gave the
place.
vacation for the weekend.
Yes, and I think this is a reason why we don't have the city parks we should. And the same reason for LA. People, if you were here, let's say, in 1910, you'd be like, this was glorious. It was all park, it looked like parkland. And so people thought, we have incredible parkland. Why are people asking us to pay taxes to get official parkland? This is fantastic. No one thought it would go away. No one thought it would all be developed. But that's what exactly happened. Yeah, it was so beautiful.
I somehow thought that Skyline Boulevard was a result of like logging. Like
Early, yes.
Early.
Well, not most of Skyline, but not really Skyline. It was more like, it was more Diamond Canyon. That's where the logs went down, Park Boulevard. Where Redwood Regional Park is now was the site of one of the most magnificent redwood groves in California. As magnificent as the one in Humboldt County. Yeah, and with trees as tall, 350-foot trees. One of the best. They used to navigate through the Golden Gate with the trees. They would use those trees as sightings. And from the late 1840s, this became part of the United States in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We basically seized California from Mexico, right, in the war. And from 1848 till early 1860s, they tore it all, they logged everything. So and that's why that port, that San Antonio, that what I'm working on, where that BART station could be, that's where the port was that the logs went to. They brought them down to there, and then from there they floated the logs on the estuary and brought them out. And really, this is something I used to say for San Franciscans. The Victorians of San Francisco, right? All those wooden houses, they are mostly built out of redwood. So they are it's Oakland's redwoods built San Francisco. So if anyone ever gives you a hard time about Oakland, you say, well, if not for Oakland, there would be no San Francisco at all.
A couple other things that I've heard that maybe you can confirm. One is about Piedmont, and my understanding is that they were in process of annexing it.
Oakland was planning to, sure.
Because Piedmont was wealthy and well-connected, they actually woke a judge up, or got a judge over the weekend to approve its incorporation, so that it blocked Oakland's plans like.
That's exactly what they did. They quickly incorporated in 1907.
The other issue about Emeryville, also about why it's a separate city. I had heard that Emeryville was essentially the red light district.
Yeah, it was Vice, and it was a place you could do things you couldn't even do in Oakland, which is hard to imagine.
Oakland politicians had no interest in making that part of Oakland. Leave it someplace else.
It had a racetrack. It had the ballpark. The Oakland Oaks played there, and it had a lot of industry, and Vice. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think there are.
Yeah, so we've got 2 extra copies of Hellatown, so if you haven't.
I have one too.
Yes, so
you can do that.
I got one, you got one. And
So if anyone wants a copy of $25.
Yep.
And
You want-
and
okay.
also, if anyone is interested in, I pulled out. If you're interested. Are you interested in that one?
If someone else wants it, please, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
What is this?
If anyone, this is a book I wrote, History of Bay Area Architecture. If anyone is interested, just let me know.